Right, hello and welcome to Pro Tools Answers, where we discuss, demonstrate and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put into the official Avid Pro Tools support forum in Facebook land. My name is Dave Phillips, audio engineer and lecturer for Point Blank Music Schools, and joining me is Anders at Tonkraftwerk in Austria and lecturer for Siegen University in Germany.
Hi.
And Andy Hageman, Avid's audio curriculum manager, who is based all the way over in Tokyo.
Konnichiwa.
Now, what we do is wade in on the forum post to show our 2 cents, or throw our 2 cents worth in, rather. But there's generally so much noise in the group and nuance in the circumstances that the right answers aren't always highlighted. And often there isn't enough information to clearly present the answer. A part of our job as lecturers and trainers is to take complex issues and boil them down with clear explanations and demonstrations in context. And that is what we're aiming to do right here. Now, our first problem comes to us from Jake, and he says, "Hi guys, really confused why Pro Tools is doing this. Must have something checked somewhere. I'm trying to change the BPM, but every time I do, all of my clips move. I thought they were locked somehow, but I'm not sure. Help." So, interesting first question to kick off the first in our Pro Tools Answers series. And what we think this relates to is more than likely is to do with ticks and samples based tracks. Would that be right, chaps?
Yep, totally.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You think so? Okay, so let's switch over to Pro Tools and we'll just have a quick look and see what ticks and samples are. The way that ticks and samples works is when you create yourself a new track, you get to select in your new tracks dialog box whether your track is a ticks-based track or whether your track is a sample-based track. And basically what these two things are doing is they're determining which of the time-based bars your clips and the events in your clips relate to. Now, as sample-based tracks, and we can change it on the track as well, so we can see here on the synth solo track. I'm just going to switch that over to samples. Now what that's going to do is it's going to lock all of the MIDI on events to our samples bar. Let me just show the samples bar here. And as we should all know, samples is an absolute time base. No matter what you do to the BPM and therefore how long it takes to get from one bar to the next, the clips should always stay in the same place. The samples never changes. It's all about time, isn't it? So 60 seconds is always 60 seconds. A minute is always a minute. The speed of the track has no bearing on how long it takes to get from 1 minute to the next. So if you lock an event to the samples bar, no matter what you do with the tempo track, those events will always be locked to the samples bar. Now, if you lock your events to the ticks based setting, they're going to be locked to the bars and beats grid. So therefore, when you change your tempo, all of those events are going to move in line with your bars and beats grid. And we can demonstrate this right here at the moment. I've got all of my tracks linked to ticks mode. And incidentally, with the audio, we should also have elastic audio turned on, but that, for the purposes of this demonstration, that's just a little bit of extra information. We'll go into a little bit of extra detail in a little bit. So if I hit play, we'll be able to hear that all of this stuff is in time. Okay, so let's just shift that synth solo track over to a samples based track. So as we know, all of this stuff is locked at the moment to the bars and beats grid. But if we lock these events here to the samples based grid, and we just alter the tempo quite significantly, actually, of this little part. We'll knock it up by about 10 BPM. We notice that only that little bit, so let's go back there. Let's do an undo and a redo. So we can see that everything around it, I mean, you can only take my word for it with the rest of the tracks that are on here, but everything that's locked to the samples, the bars and beats grid, sorry, is moving, and the thing that's locked to the samples grid is not moving. Okay, so let's just reinsert our tempo event. Play. So there we go. We can see.
That is some very artistic vibrato.
I know. It's lovely how it didn't quite catch on the fact that the expression had reset itself. So the reason that that some of your clips are moving. What was the original question? It was that trying to change BPM, but every time I do, all of my clips move. The reason is that all of those clips are locked to the bars and beats grid. They're all set to ticks mode. And when you change the BPM, your clips move, because essentially what's happening is all of the clip boundaries, which is this is what we refer to these here. All the clip boundaries become locked to the bars and beats grid. So they essentially become note on events. So when you change the tempo with a regular audio clip in ticks mode, it locks to the bars and beats grid, and those clip boundaries move along with the tempo changes.
Can I jump in real quick? Can we, now that you've shown what a tick-based track does, backfill it and talk about what a tick is? Because I think what you're going to show using audio tracks is probably the end of what it is that we should probably be showing off. Okay. All right. So real quickly, I think one of the things that people miss are what exactly ticks are and why do we even care about them? And just so we can kind of get a basic understanding of what a tick is and why it exists. So let's take a look at, okay, so let's say I've got printed music. And the printed music, for example, has 4 different quarter notes, okay? Now, if I'm a bass player, and I am, which is why I'm using a bass clef, noblest of all clefs, the chances of me playing those 4 notes exactly on time are about 0. Okay, so the chances of me playing perfectly mathematically accurate is unlikely. And I'll go one step further. If I were to play mathematically accurate, I could very well lose the style that I was going for. So if it was jazz and I was playing mathematically accurate, it is artistically wrong. So what we need is a way to capture the nuance of timing within the MIDI spec, and that's what a tick is. Now, what a tick does is it divides each quarter note into a number of small divisions, just like in digital audio, we divide a second into samples. If we divide a second into samples for audio, we divide a quarter note into ticks. And the number of ticks that we have per quarter note is 960. Okay, so between each one of these quarter notes, there are 960 small divisions of time that we could possibly use. So let's put this into a real world situation. So let's say that, let's see.
And this is regardless of tempo, by the way, right?
This is regardless of tempo.
Yeah.
So, and that's a great point, Anders, is that if my tempo is slower, then the ticks will go slower as well.
But there are still 960 ticks.
But there's
per
still
quarter.
960
Exactly,
ticks.
yeah.
Right. So So if you have, I remember back in the old days, I had this Mark of the Unicorn digital timepiece, which is a great synchronization box, and it would flash with every tick. And if the tempo was fast, it would be a solid red light. But if you slowed the tempo down, you could actually see the flashing of each one of those individual ticks. So let's say, for example, that in the real world, as I played this, I played the first note just a shade late. I played the second note even later. I played the third note exactly on time, and I played the fourth note just a little bit earlier. Well, the way that this works is the first note would be bar 1, beat 1, tick, let's say 30, which means I'm 30 960ths of a quarter note late, okay? And let's say then that this one was even later, so this would be bar 1, beat 2, tick, let's say 120, which is a little bit later than that. Now, Anders, if I was to call this a tick value, it would be what?
Probably bar 1, beat 3, 0 ticks.
That's exactly right, because strangely enough, and probably not in the real life world, I played it exactly on time. Now, here's where people can sometimes, even musicians will sometimes get just a little bit confused. This last note is actually slightly before 4 comes around. So even though this is the fourth quarter note that I'm playing in the bar, the MIDI location for this is going to be bar 1, beat 3, tick 950, let's say. So it's 10 ticks before that note comes around. And why do we have ticks? So that we can capture as much of the nuance of the human performance as possible. Now, all timing in Pro Tools is either going to be sample-based or tick-based. It either follows ontological real time or it follows 960 divisions of whatever tempo we're actually in right now. Does that make sense?
Great. That's just a great way to describe what ticks are, and I can show you my screen of a simple session here where I have exactly 2 clips. One of them is a MIDI clip on an instrument track, and one of them is an audio clip on an audio track. And the audio clip is as usual a sample-based track, and the instrument track is a tick-based track, as they are by default by standard. They both start at the same location at bar 3 at the first beat, and they are both exactly the same length. You can see that here. They are both 4 bars long, and they play exactly the same. When I play this part here, I'm turning on my metronome so you can hear that too. And as you can hear, they're playing the exact same thing here, the MIDI instrument and the actual audio recording of the piano. And what is interesting here is that this guy here, his events and his time base is set to follow the ticks, which is of course relative. As the tempo changes, the 960 ticks have to slow down or speed up, the other way around, slow down or speed up, and will take longer time or shorter time. But this guy, he is set to sample base, which is of course always the same figure. The samples don't change in their length by changing the tempo. The tempo is now 115. So if I go ahead and change this tempo now to let's say 100, you will see at the very instance when I press OK here that the tick-based track will actually move to a later location, because that third bar is starting later in the time now, and it's actually, you can see that it's still, when I click on this guy, it's selected. You can see up here that it's still 4 bars long, and starts still on third bar, first beat, whereas this guy, his time base is samples, so he will still start on the exact same sample location, sample number 200,348, but he will not change his length. And you can see the length of this one just got shorter. The amount of time is still the same, but the actual length in comparison looks shorter. So let me just change back that tempo to 115 again, and you can see how they will change in retrospect here. 115, and let's move them to the same location as well. Whoa, sorry, I just did something stupid here, right? So like this, 115, and now they both look the same. And this guy is still at sample 200,348. So what happens now if I set all of my tracks to being tick-based, which was probably the problem in the question here. So if all of my tracks are tick-based and I change the tempo, all of the clips in my tracks will move to still be positioned at bar number 3. So let's do 90 or something. And it looks like the clips moved and they're still playing back at bar number 3, but that happens at another sample position.
So let's talk about how elastic audio factors into this as well, because one of the really powerful things about being able to link your audio tracks to the bars and beats grid is to be able to have real sampled audio react to tempo changes alongside the MIDI work as well, because it would be a little bit pointless if we were working with MIDI and audio but not being able to alter the tempo of our songs mid-recording. If we wanted to decide that maybe a chorus needed to speed up a little bit, or you wanted to slow something down a little bit, and we can use the MIDI grid to be able to affect our sampled audio. So the key thing with this is that we're using elastic audio. Now, when I was doing my demonstration earlier on, I had elastic audio automatically turned on. Now, typically with an audio track, when you first load up audio tracks, unless you've got it set in your settings, elastic audio is going to be disabled. And therefore, any tempo changes that you make with audio on tick-based tracks, none of those, the tracks aren't going to compress or expand in time with the tempo. So we need to switch our elastic audio on. And I'm going to be demonstrating this with the drum track. So I'm going to be switching on the rhythmic elastic audio plugin, and that's particularly nice for maintaining transient quality, specifically with percussion tracks, and the rhythmic plugin description is perfect for that. Now, what happens is, I was explaining earlier on that when you have a track working in ticks mode, it's the clip boundaries that are locked to the bars and beats grid. But when you turn on the rhythmic mode, a lot more happens under the hood. If we switch over to analysis mode, we can see here, and it's very, very clear with our kick drum track, that we can see a whole bunch of these little markers. And these are called transient markers. And what Pro Tools does is it detects all of the transient events within a track. And obviously, this is really dependent on how transient your material is. If we go down here to an electric guitar track, for example, which is around there, and we switch that over to analysis mode, we can see that there are a lot more positives in there. There's a lot more detail, and because of the harmonically kind of rich content of an electric guitar, it may throw up a lot more false positives. So you may need to do a little bit of work to actually boil down into which of these transients are useful for the purposes of this task. But with our kick drum, it's nice and clear. And what is being locked to the ticks grid in this case is actually these transient markers. Now, Pro Tools has no idea what music is. All it knows is it just knows events, and Pro Tools is detecting the events that it sees within the clips, placing these markers on those events, and then by turning on ticks mode on our track, it's locking those events to the ticks bars and beats grid, and therefore also locking our transient events to the ticks grid as well. So that's the key thing. So if you've got lots of transient markers on your track, such as this little break between electric guitar notes. Those are also going to lock as well. That could cause problems, possibly during quantizing or with some other workflow. So you do have to be careful with that, and obviously we can get rid of these. So if we have a look at this guitar track here, we can see that there are multiple sort of kind of false positive transient markers here that are...
Dave?
Yep.
I hate to be the one to interrupt, but just so you know, the actual Avid official name for this is not transient marker, it's event marker. And I think there's a significance to it, because when we talk about MIDI, everything that's MIDI related is in the what menu? The event menu.
Yes.
And the word event has a long storied history with MIDI and tick-based stuff. So just so you know that when you were taking a look at markers inside of analysis view or warp view, the analysis view markers are called event markers, and the warp view markers are called, of course, warp markers.
Of course, and that makes sense, because we're essentially relating these event markers to MIDI events, aren't we? That's what I was comparing them to earlier on. These are essentially notes-on events for audio.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for correcting me there, Andy. You're right. I should be using the correct terminology. So with these event markers locked to our MIDI grid, when we change the tempo now, and let's just update the tempo there. Again, we'll notch up to 90 BPM. We can see that those all update. They compress a little bit because the speed is quicker. The time it takes to get between each of the bars is less, so therefore they kind of move in and come a little bit closer together.
Do you mind turning on your grid, Dave? Then it's probably easier to see also the grid lines, with the grid lines on. The samples or the events stick on the grid lines.
Yeah, there you go. All right, if I do just make it a little bit bigger, and I'll do this. Well, the same thing happens with the kick out, doesn't it? So if I just switch that over to analysis view as well, and then we'll do another change. Bring it back. I'll notch it up to 95 this time. So there we go. We can see things moving just off of the grid. So that's what's happening. The event markers are linked to the transient markers. Now, if we just going to pop one extra little bit of info in here. If we had done some quantizing, then we'd be working in warp view. And what can happen is when you quantize, is you can actually lock these event markers to the grid by double clicking them. Well, quantizing would actually do it automatically, to be fair. But it's both of these marker types, the warp markers and the event markers, are going to be locked to the grid in the same way. And we'll do a whole other thing on quantizing with elastic audio, and going into a little bit more detail about that at some point in the future.
Great. So maybe I should talk about song position start marker. What happens when you're moving the song start marker in Pro Tools and with regards of tick-based and sample-based tracks. So I'm just switching, sharing my desktop here. You can see my Pro Tools back again with the same two tracks here. My instrument track is tick-based, and my audio track, my piano, is sample-based. And the red little diamond here is the song start marker, and I can take that and drag that along to have the song start at a different later in the session. And if I just drag this along, you can see the tick-based material or tick-based tracks move along with the song start marker, because they are locked in time to this position at the exact bar 3, and that remains even if the song starts later. Whereas the sample-based materials does not move with the song start marker.
And Anders, let me interject real quick. It's because what Anders is doing is he's moving the location of bar 1. He's not moving the location of 0 minutes.
Exactly. That's a very, very good way to put it, or that's the way to put it. So how can I move all of my stuff if I need to have the song start at a later stage in my session? Maybe I want an intro or make way, and I can do that from the event menu in event time operations, move song start. And here I get the option to say, where do you want to move it to? At the location for minute seconds, or sample location, or a bar beats location. So let's just say that I need to have 10 seconds before the song should really start. And I have the option here to move the song start only, or the song start, meter, tempo, key, and chord rulers, and all tick-based markers and tracks. That's what usually happens. And here, no sample-based markers and tracks. And if I select all sample-based markers and tracks, they will move as if they were tick-based. So if I do that, you can see both of them moved. By the way, now my song start marker is a bit later, and every time I hit return to play my song from the start, it will jump back to this to before the start. And there's a great shortcut to actually jump to song start, which is Control return on the Mac, or Start return on a PC.
That is that is fantastic. That is a sugar cube and a half.
And I write exactly, and I write a lot of music for film, and I usually, or it's very vital to have the actual bar and beat starting on the exact frame where I want it to start, and I just grab this and be in grid mode in frames, and I just move it to the exact frame, and that's where my first bar of the first and the first beat of the first bar should start, and that's a great way to do it.
And let's not forget too that if you have your song start at the very beginning of your timeline, and if the count off happens and you play a note 1 tick before bar 1, then that data is completely lost. So
exactly,
even having just a little bit of space before the song start. Now, Anders, let me ask you a question, and I know you know the answer to it. How could you move the song start without affecting that MIDI track?
I could have held option while moving the song starter. Is that correct, Ryan? No, it's wrong.
No.
No, it's right.
Is
or is
it right?
it wrong? No. Sorry. Let me check that. So I need to move the song start without affecting this guy. That's a very good question. I don't know, Andy. I have a feeling.
Great. Well, this is why we're all here. So if you wanted to, and when you said scoring, it immediately brought this to mind. So if I had done my scoring and somehow I had played something that ultimately turned out to be a pickup note or something like that, then what I would do is I would take all of my MIDI tracks and temporarily change them to be sample-based tracks, right? So by default, audio tracks are sample-based and MIDI tracks and instrument tracks are tick-based, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can have a sample-based MIDI track or a sample-based instrument track, and there's lots of reasons why you might want to have that. Here's one. So what Anders could do, if he shows the screen again.
I can share my screen and do that as you speak if you want me to.
So, yep, that'd be great.
So
what he's going to do...
Okay.
What he's going to do is he's going to go to that instrument track, and
right here,
instead of having it be, tick-based tracks, he'll change it to be sample-based. Now, at this point, you can drag, or you can insert time. You can do whatever you want to, but you can change your song start to be whatever you want to. And for however long that MIDI track is sample-based, it will ignore tempo changes. And it's a little bit dangerous. You're playing with fire if you're doing a music thing. You have to be very careful about what you're doing, but it can save you sometimes.
Yeah, that's probably how I would have sold it. I thought you maybe had some kind of nifty shortcut here for us.
Now, When it comes to music, sometimes there's no shortcuts. Now, if I can jump in, so I want to talk about how you could use the same kind of thing, but without using elastic audio.
That's a great one.
So let me share my screen. There we go. So, and before I do that, I want to show, I think, two preferences that I think are at the root of the poster's question, right? So stuff was moving and he didn't expect it to. If you go into your preferences window and you go into the editing tab, in the tracks section, you'll see here, new tracks default to tick time-based. That was clearly what was happening to this guy because it was a surprise to him that audio tracks clips were moving with tempo changes. So unclicking that will not automatically make new tracks default to tick time-based. The other one that's worth mentioning, because Dave was talking about elastic audio, is if you go to processing, enable elastic audio on new tracks, which doesn't make it tick-based, but it does, I think, relate to what he's talking about. Elastic audio is fantastic, but to be honest with you, I'm not the guy who typically will use a lot of elastic audio on drums. Because if you stretch drums or compress them, they can sound less authentic. And so what I've got here is I've got 3 different tracks. I've got MIDI drums, I've got acoustic drums, and I've got a click track over here. And I just noticed that click is written in katakana.
That's fantastic. How do you do that?
Live in Japan. So here you go. So if I start playing, there we go. Let's go ahead and stop that. No, this happens on Zoom all the. So everything's lined up. Now here's the problem. So what I'm going to do is I want to make a tempo change and I want to slow down the drums. So I'm going to make this tick based and I'm going to make this tick based. And I think that I've solved my problem, right? And so what I'll do is I'll make a tempo change here and I'll slow it down. And then I realize, whoops, something has happened very weird. One is that this top track, which is a tick-based track, it's doing what I want it to do. The audio drums is not doing what I want it to do because it doesn't have elastic audio on it. And when you're talking about a tick-based track, each clip is an event. Okay, so each clip is locked to a tick-based location, and Pro Tools is doing exactly what you want it to do. Now the click track is stretching just the way that Dave showed, because this is an audio track with elastic audio on it. So I have all sorts of things. Now the problem is as I start to stretch this out, maybe this click track might sound a little bit nasty. So let me go back here. I'll undo my tempo changes, and so now I'm back to normal. So what I'm going to do is I am going to do a little trick here, and I'm going to triple click on the track, which selects all the clips on the track. And this is a lazy way to do this, but it works well. Is I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to separate the clip on transients. And this is your poor man's beat detective right here. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting on each individual transient. You'll see all of a sudden now, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clips, I've now got maybe 100 clips, right? And all of those clips, each one of them is linked to a tick-based location. And I'm going to do the same thing here. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take elastic audio off this click because I don't want to stretch my click either. And what I'll do is I'll select this, do the same thing. So I'll go over here, separate the clip on transients. It's going to be easy. Boom. Now what happens is now as I change things, I'll speed up this time. What's going to happen is now all of these are going to move at the same tempo because all of the individual hits are locked to the same tick-based location. And if I wanted to be kind of crazy, I could do something like, come on. Something like this, Grammy, and then you'll see. And this is, using elastic audio is great, and it works great for some instruments. It works great for voices. It works great for violins and stuff. For drums, stretching out and crushing drums gets to be an artificial kind of a feeling. Just another way to do it.
It's like everything, though, isn't it? It's just a tool, one tool that you've got available to you, and you've got to pick the right tool for the job. And it's all subjective to what you're working on. Nothing is a catch-all.
No. If you understand how it works, you can make the right choices at any time.
Exactly. Now we have 2 great examples of when to set the tracks to tick-based and when to have them sample-based.
But the last thing that I wanted to talk about, just quickly, with going back to the preferences window where Andy was showing how to automatically default new tracks to ticks and also automatically turn on the elastic audio. That's really key thing for people that are working pretty much always in a MIDI environment. Producers that are doing EDM stuff where there's always going to be a mix of MIDI and audio. It's probably quite important to make sure that all of your things are always going to be synced up, whether you are a Pro Tools expert or not. Just having that turned on automatically means it's something else you don't have to think about, right?
Depends on what your goals are, of course. I think if you're working a lot in MIDI and all of your MIDI and instrument tracks will be tick based by default, but I think there are certain occasions where you can use that. The most important thing to know is how they work and when to use what mode.
Exactly.
Actually, let me ask one question of both of you guys. Anders, I think we've talked about this before. Aux tracks and master faders default to sample-based operation. So let's review. Audio tracks default to sample-based, but you can change them to tick-based. MIDI tracks and instrument tracks default to tick-based, but you can change them to sample-based. Okay. Aux tracks and master fader tracks and routing faders or routing folders will default to sample-based. Why would you ever change an aux track to be tick-based? What's the workflow that fits into?
Yeah, that's a great one. We talked about that earlier, you and me, Andy, and I think it's best that you describe that. I can do it, but it's your sugar cube.
it's my burden. Yeah, great. Make me work. So let me show my screen again, and so what I've got. Let's assume that these are music tracks that I have routed to a stem. So what I've got. Let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say that these are 3 drums and I have them mapped, outputted to a stem. I don't, but let's just say that I did. And let's say that this stem had some automation that was important to the song. So at the bridge, it gets softer, or the chorus, it gets louder, or whatever. If I change tempos, in my tempo ruler, right now, my drums would speed up or slow down. My click track would speed up and slow down. Why? Because they're tick-based tracks. But nothing would happen to the automation on my aux track, because my aux track is, if I change things, come on. Let's just make these a little bit tinier. Boink. Come on. There we go. At this point, if I was to change tempo, with the pencil tool, let's say, zoop. So I'll write something new here. Or not. There we go. If I write a new tempo change, you can see nothing has happened, although to my tick-based tracks, something has happened. So now the stem mix is no longer aligned with my other tracks. So my drums playing and the drums mixing are now disengaged. And so now what we can do is we can take this stem and I can take this aux track and I can make this a tick-based aux track. And what will happen is that now, just like clicks, just like event markers, just like all the other stuff we've been talking about, each one of these automation breakpoints is now similarly locked to, yes, a tick-based location. So now if I go here and, come on, man. And now you can see that it has changed slightly. Let me go ahead and I'll just trim this up here. Zoop.
This is really serving to remind us, or everybody, that everything that appears on the timeline is an event, isn't it? And it has to be locked to something. It has to relate to either the samples grid, or it has to relate to the bars and beats grid.
Exactly right.
I really hope that ties up that question, and I hope that was an interesting episode. Obviously, we're going to be doing a lot more in this series. Hopefully, you're going to be joining us for the rest of them. For now, please like the video, subscribe to the page. Don't forget you can drop questions into the Avid Pro Tools forum in Facebook. We'll leave a link in the description. Maybe we'll deal with your question as part of our series. So all leaves me to say is thanks to Anders.
Thank you.
And thanks to Andy.
Take care.
My name's Dave. This is Pro Tools Answers, and we're out.